white supremacists were people that if you walked up to them and you said, "Are you a white supremacist?" they'd be like, "Hell yeah," right? That was what a white supremacist looked like. Yeah. Now it's these people who are undercover and pretend they're not, apparently. This is what we're being told. A lot of these narratives, whether it's intersectionality or these structures of oppression or all this stuff, they don't actually have any logical or reasonable underpinning. And so the only way you can defend them is by shutting down people who don't agree with you. Because if you have a reasonable, rational argument, their views crumble like a house of cards because they're not built on anything. They're built on fallacious logic and just assertions without any basis in fact. So that's why I think now the left, the radical left, not all of the left, but the radical left, have come to this place where they have to shut down and label and smear anyone who doesn't agree with them, because their ideas are not based on anything.
So the language, we know it. The most innocuous remarks about somebody else can be painted as bigotry, as hatred, the doozy of them all, racist, because that's the ultimate slur, I think, to be called a racist. To judge somebody else by the colour of their skin is a shocking thing to do. Well, it is, but it's used as a weapon against people who simply want to discuss differences.
And it debases language. We had Lionel Shriver on my YouTube show called Trigonometry recently, and one of the points that she made is the word racist has been used so much and so inappropriately. That is why we now use terms like white supremacist, because being a racist is no longer enough. You have to take it up a notch.
Right.
And that's why the word of white supremacy has come back.
So in this rejection of our past, because that's what it is, I mean, these great concepts of freedom of conscience, probably the first of them, really. Don't burn others at the stake for holding a minority view. Freedom of speech, freedom of association. You can't have freedom of speech if you don't have the right to associate or not associate. Discrimination is painted as a terrible word, but it's often a normal part of living. You discriminate when you decide not to invite me to dinner but to ask your next door neighbour. But I don't complain. Mind you, I'd like to come to the next dinner party.
Well, you might be complaining after this, yeah.
But to what extent, now you've come from a society that your parents wanted you moved out of, that was Marxist in origin. It was communist.
Yeah.
To what extent do you...
Well, it wasn't real communism, apparently.
Well,
I keep being told by 18-year-olds on the internet.
Yeah, right. So
it wasn't real communism.
Nothing wrong with the theory, it was just the way it was implemented. Because the theory was hopelessly wrong. And the theory was wrong because there was an assumption in it that people would give their loyalty to the party and the state ahead of those around them, the ones that they loved, their husbands, their wives, their children, their aunts, their uncles, their community. We're not wired like that.
That's exactly it. They're ignoring fundamental human biology.
Yeah.
And the way we
I would
evolved.
think human nature.
Human nature, exactly. That's what I mean. So the way we evolved to be, they're completely ignoring any of that. And that's why the theory doesn't work. It might be a great theory, but it doesn't work in practice because human beings, as you say, are not wired in that way.
Yeah. So the point to take out of that, because I think it's a very, very important point, is it's not just that it failed because it wasn't implemented properly. The theory is not a great theory. It's not a workable theory. But to where I wanted to go with this is where we've got to understand where we've got to now. So your family wanted you to come to the West where there was a different, if you like, set of foundational principles, evolved over a lot of time, a lot of blood, sweat, tears. We would dismiss it now. We don't teach it. Apparently it's all dark. But you go back to the 20s, and it was obvious to a lot of people who were committed to a Marxist worldview that there was at least one major problem. The working class were not rising up. They didn't seem interested. They seemed too lethargic. Perhaps they'd been opiated too much by religion or whatever to overthrow the terrible capitalist societies that they were in. So you had this push to say, well, we better accelerate the process, find other mechanisms to smash democratic capitalism, introduce communism. It became known as cultural Marxism because the model was to attack the cultural institutions of the West and to weaken them. Family, church, academia, whatever.
Community.
And then over time, that's morphed into let's accumulate as many people with grievances as possible, stoke those grievances and weld them into bodies that oppose everything Western. Do you think that's what's happened?
I think that's exactly what's happened. That is exactly what's happened. The long march through the institutions, which is what you just described, is a way of capturing power in a capitalist society. The one thing I would say on that, which I always try to make a point of, there is a reason that communism and radical socialism is making a comeback now, particularly among young people. And the reason is that young people, and Douglas Murray, who I know you've spoken to recently, talks about this as well. If you are a young person today, living in London or in the southeast of England or in many big cities in America, I imagine in Australia it's similar. I have some friends there too. I do have friends in Australia, and some of them are young people, young comedians, for example. And the reality for young people today is that the idea of buying a property in London, let's say, is completely out of the realms of the possible. And if you live in a society where people have no access to the one form of capital that traditionally you would have a chance to accumulate, it's very difficult to expect people to be capitalists in that kind of environment.
I understand that. And I think that's a real concern. And I had a long time in government. I believe in sound economic management. What people miss is that government and economics in the Western model is downstream of culture. And that's highly significant because I think capitalism has, been badly traduced in many ways, almost crony capitalism, the model we have today.
Exactly.
You go back to Lehman Brothers, the breakdown of prudence, of integrity, so bankers stopped asking, what is the right thing to do? And instead asked, what can I get away with? How can I prosper most rapidly? And it ended in tears because unsustainable and unconscionable and economically very stupid decisions were made.